All right. Um, it's amazing. It's already the end of the day. Just one last session. Um, in this last session, what we're going to do is it's going to be a panel as well. Um, we've got four speakers. We've got myself. We've got Ted Leidy with the Colorado Home Builders Association. We've got Jennifer Newcomer and Phyllis Resnick, who are online, and are with Colorado Future Center. What we're really going to be talking about is this housing unit and household drama that we've been kind of referring to most of the day. We're each going to take a segment and talk about some of the data and information out there. And then we're going to take a lot of Q&A. And I wish you guys could have been on our practice session because we had more fun talking to each other on the phone, planning for it than, or like, oh, we should have just recorded this. I'm having a hard time moving this forward, Adam. Which button do I push? I know Kim had the same problem for a slight minute. My minute's lasting longer. None of the bars are working. All right, so back. Sorry that I could not get that to work. So really what I think is important is to really take a look at both sides, right? Not just supply of housing units, which a lot of people are talking about, but also this demand side. And we talked actually a lot about the demand side this morning, so I'm going to be reiterating just a couple of points, but just to tie it together in terms of what we're seeing happening in Colorado because of our changing jobs, our changing age, some other, interesting things like interest rates, this other thing called non-primary residence, or sometimes called a vacant housing unit, how all of these different pieces come together along with supply, which Ted is going to be primarily talking about. This morning, we heard this direct relationship. A job is a person. A housing unit is where that job sleeps at night. We heard about how they're growing, which industries are growing, how there are a lot of higher income industries as well as some lower income industries, that a lot of people are coming from the coasts and they come and they see the prices in Colorado and they're like, yeah, reasonably priced. They're like, yeah, not really too much traffic. So a lot of it really is the lens that we end up comparing what we really are, a national market for jobs and housing. And so it all is very relative. It's important to see that we've had increases in median household income. Yes, we feel tight. We feel like we're being stretched, but at the same time, if you look between 2000 and 2010, this is the median household income for the United States is in the blue and Colorado's in the red, really no change between 2000 and 2010, but look from 2010 through 2020, kind of an escalation in median household income. You can also see the impact from inflation on that last little tick down. This is in real $22. We then heard a great presentation from Cindy about the impact of age and how age impacts everything that we do, from preferences to how we participate in the labor force, how much money we make, how often we move. So where are we? And what kind of data and information is out there for people to use? Both our office as well as the Census Bureau provide and produce housing data, estimates data, population estimates. You heard from Nancy this morning, really looking at where we are in terms of total housing units. We're at about 2.6 million housing units. We've got about 5.7 million household population. We've got, then if we use the ACS data, we've got about 2.3, almost 2.4 million households. Of that, about 33% are renter and about 66% are owners. And that matters because actually ownership changes over time. And it's not just a factor of, age groups do something. What we also see is that the economy also has a big impact on that ownership rate. We can see, this change in home ownership for both Colorado and the United States and how it gets impacted by different downturns or different impacts in the society. Geography will also have a huge impact in that ownership rate. In Denver, it's about a 50-50 split because it's got about 50% are apartments or for rent and 50% homes. So, Denver doesn't have an opportunity to get up to a 65% home ownership rate or a 70% home ownership rate simply because of the type of housing units. We can also look at our households or this ownership rate. And what was very interesting to see is that about 31% of our owner-occupied housing units don't have a mortgage, but that's lower than the US average. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we're really young. And as we age, we tend to pay off our mortgage, or at least that's our goal. About 57% of our households over the age of 65 don't have a mortgage. So this then has something to say about potentials in terms of financial security, home value appreciation, and what kind of future our households will be facing. We also know that about 78% of our households are worker households. 78% of our households are worker households. 22% are non-workers, meaning they're not working, they're relaxing. That's going to change. And we need to think about how that's going to impact our communities and impact this potential supply of housing. We were talking with lunch and people are saying, yeah, no, nobody ever wants to retire. And I'm like, I might want to. So I still think there's going to be non-workers out there. But I don't know, maybe I will get bored, maybe I won't. But important to understand how that might impact dynamics. Cindy did a great job again talking about age, and this is another tool that she's created where we can look at households by age groups. And she's created forecasts, estimates and forecasts by household age out through 2050. We're going to be revising and updating these with the new 22 data in the next, we'll see what Cindy's going to kill me, in the next couple of months. But what's great to tell from this is currently about 35% of our households are 25 to 44, another 35% are 45 to 64, and then about 25% are about 65 plus, and about 5% are in that 18 to 24 age group. We can take this and then look and forecast what's going to happen by age group. And if you look what happened last decade between 2010 and 2020, we had an increase of 195,000 households 65 plus. Very little movement in those under 65. I mean, still 60,000 and 22,000 in the other age groups. But we can also look at our forecast for this next decade by another 196,000 increase in households over the age of 65. Growth in that 25 to 44-year-old households, but only if what? Come on, say it. Yeah. Migration. You're cheating. You knew the answer. I just wanted to see if everybody else was listening. Only if there is migration to the state. We care about age because it also impacts other characteristics. For example, if you are an owner or renter, changes by age. We look at our youngins, 41% are owner occupied versus our older adults, 84%, 80%, 73%. So older adults tend to be owners, younger adults tend to be renters. And you're thinking to yourself, you're like, duh, Elizabeth. And I'm like, I know, but it's important to put it out on a picture and a graph for you to also see, because this will impact as we transition, because what you heard this morning, what faster growth in the older adults, slower growth in the younger adults. And this ties directly into mobility and how often we move. If we look at our younger adults, about 37% of them moved a year ago. So within a year, if you translate that 37%, that's about once every 2.5 years, our youngins move. And I'm thinking to myself, what, only 2.5 times? I know when I was in that age group, I think I moved every single year, plus even one of those years at least 2 or 3 times. But if we look at that 65 to 74-year-olds, only 6% moved. That is the equivalent of once every 16 years. So think about what this does to just the churn in our housing market, with all of us aging into age groups that don't move as often. So this has been part of the factors impacting housing as well. Persons per household also change by age. I was a little stunned by this. 28% of all of our households are single person households. And I don't mean single as in not married. I mean single like I like to live by myself. And 42% of our households 65 plus are single or one person households. Well, that also impacts what? That impacts household size, which which Nancy talked about this morning. On the left-hand side, we've got household size for the U.S. as a whole, and we can see that declining household size over time. This graph starts in 1960. The black line is 1985, which is also where the Colorado graph starts. But I thought it would be interesting to see the Colorado graph because, big picture is like, oh, it's just a nice, pretty curve. But no, when you look at it close up, we can see these bounces in a time frame when we should be seeing a downward pressure in household size. With the declining birth rates, with the aging of the population, with our changes in preferences, we should see that downward pressure. But we also know that the economy as a whole has an impact on that household size. We can see first a bump up in the 90s where we had really fast growth and we were not keeping up in terms of housing. Oh, and then we've got the second bump where we've got growing population and not keeping up in housing. So we can see that this household size will change with not just characteristics of the population, but the economy as well. Why does this matter? Well, we can do the math behind it. As an example here, if we've got 2 million housing units and our household size is 2.58, which it was in 2017, it can accommodate a little over 5 million people. If our household size falls to 2.48, it can only accommodate about 4.9 million people. About 200,000 fewer people accommodated by the same number of housing units. Said another way, in order to accommodate the same number of people, we would need 80,000 more housing units, or basically 2 years of growth in our housing units coming online. So this has a significant impact in our capacity to house all of our population. Yes, we're forecasting growth. The blue line is our total households that we're forecasting. If you look at the straight line, you're like, oh yeah, pretty straight line. But if we look at the change in that line over time, we can see that we're really forecasting growth in the short run in that annual increase in households or household formation. A lot of that driven by what Cindy was talking about this morning in terms of aging, and then what Greg was talking about in terms of needing people to fill those jobs, not just new jobs, but old jobs. But then slowing down in that growth rate or in that growth out into the future. We can also look at specific ages. We don't do household forecasts by these 5-year age groups, that we do our total population by these age groups. And one of the things that we can see is in that grouping, where we have kind of a 65 plus in our household forecast, it's really driven by our 75 to 84-year-olds. So even a higher kind of occupancy, lower mobility, but also when we age into the 80 plus is also when we start seeing people age into needing more care, needing more maybe assisted living. So this is an idea where we've got some strategies that we may need in place to help people age in place well and learn how to transition as well. I know even within my own family where I know all of this data, did we plan? No. So like my mom, when she needed to transition, her house stayed vacant for 2.5 years. I know I'm part of the problem. How many of me are out there? Okay, please, God help, right? Um, we can also see the growth in the 40-year-olds. What do 40-year-olds do? That's kind of the move up housing. That's also the beginning of the prime second home owning age group. Beware mountains. We can see a slowdown in the youngins, those that are typically apartment dwellers. So these are things that we can use to try and do a better job of determining what we need in the future and not just necessarily building for today. We also know that this will impact the types of households that we will have. Our fastest growth and our largest is in more than one adult with no children. Our second fastest group, one adult, no children. Our children homes are staying about stable just because we're seeing that downward pressure in birth rates. So we can even think about the types of housing that we might want in the future. I won't spend a lot of time really talking about this vacant or non-primary housing. A lot of times when you talk about vacant housing units, people talk about, oh, you know, like that's just the for rent and for sale. And I'm like, that's just a piece. We've got the vacant or the rented, not occupied. We've got the sold, not occupied. Then we've got that big, pretty one known as seasonal vacant. It's about 44% of all of our vacant units are vacant seasonal, or what we'd also call maybe second homes or VRBO. There's another one in there. It's relatively small. It says all other vacant. When I looked up on the Census Bureau's website what that meant, it makes some of it makes sense. So it's just sitting there vacant, like being remodeled. Another reason, storage. Can you believe it? Storage. Granted, that's probably what I was doing with my mom's house. It was storage. But probate, another way that a house can be vacant. So that's why I'm really talking, and granted, it doesn't hit all of your areas of interest, but we will be seeing a larger, faster growth in our older population. Our older population, as you heard from Nancy this morning, tends to die. If you don't have a plan, I'm sorry, Nancy, you're going to be hearing about this for a while. If we don't put plans in place to help our older adults age well, a lot of those housing units could end up for years in probate sitting vacant, which is another challenge. We can see that vacancy changes over time and even vacant seasonal changes over time. We're actually at one of our lowest rates in over a decade in terms of that vacant seasonal, which is interesting to think about as well. Maybe that demand has just gotten so high that those seasonal owners are like, gosh, I'm selling out. This is great buck. Or what we also talked about years ago is that a lot of the folks that had seasonal homes up in the mountains now are making those their primary homes. So it could be just a transition. Very briefly, I'm going to talk about housing supply before turning it over to Ted. Know that we're always looking at this relationship, housing units and households over time. And it looks like they move in tandem, but Nancy also mentioned this morning, is that when we look at just the annual change, often housing units are growing faster than households, or households are growing faster than housing units. And that then really reiterates this challenge that we've got in that housing supply, in the construction industry itself, where we see this boom and bust cycle. This chart starts in 1960. Look at all of the different boom and bust cycles. And I really want you to focus really on the last probably 30 to 40 years. Look at that growth from 1990 through about 2006 when we hit the Great Recession. Nice, steady growth. And look at that clip. The reason I put this up here is often when I'm talking with people, people think that the problem that we have in housing is just a Colorado issue. And I'm like, oh no, this was a national financial housing crisis. We lost over 70,000 jobs in the construction industry during that time frame. If we think it's really hard to get people in different industries, imagine trying to attract people to the construction industry, knowing about this boom and bust cycle. I'm sorry, Ted. I know it's your life. Uh, we're very similar to other states where we've seen this boom and bust. You know, we've got Texas, North Carolina, Washington to show that change also in building permits. But what Nancy illustrated this morning is typically what we see is when we see a slowdown in housing units, like in the late 80s when we had the savings and loan and the oil and gas bust, we also saw a slowdown in population. What didn't happen during the Great Recession is we didn't see a slowdown in population. We kept growing, not exponentially like you hear from the media, but just steady growth, what we expected, but we saw no housing units being built. And that is what I think we should be talking about, is not just these short run solutions that we're looking at, but also how do we keep this from happening time and time again? We can look at where we are in terms of building permits right now per thousand in population, where we're in the top 10. So we are building. We're back at that pre-COVID levels, pre-Great Recession levels. But if we look at the time series as well, we can see that there's lots of times where we're not. We're not producing at that right level. We are monitoring conditions. We're looking at this ratio of household population to total housing units that Nancy talked about this morning. We don't know what the right ratio is, but I can tell you we're going in the right direction. When we get a lower number, that means there's more housing units per that total household population as a whole. We're seeing household size go back down toward that trend trajectory that we would anticipate. We're seeing a little itty bitty of downward pressure in home prices, which is the direction we would want to see. We're seeing downward pressure in rentals, which is where we'd want to see. Is it what we absolutely need to be a healthy state? Probably not. But are we going in the right direction? I would say at least the right direction. So I'm going to turn things over to Ted. But again, I want us to make sure that we're always thinking about this idea of both demand by our household characteristics as well as this supply side. Turn it over to you, Ted. And Adam, I'm sorry, I'm going to need your help.
We're gonna do it. You're patient for waiting. Got him. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me here. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, what? Let's do that. You guys hear me? I've never been accused of being a low talker, so but I'll try to keep it close to this. I do kind of walk around a little bit, so just yell at me to get back to the mic if you can't hear me. But thank you for having me here today. Yes, it is a Friday afternoon, and thankfully I'm not the last one keeping you from your weekend, but Jennifer and Phyllis are going to have even probably better information than I have. But yeah, I was asked to kind of come talk about some of the cost drivers, what the current housing market is. Hopefully leave you with a little bit of good news before today, because there are a lot of challenges out there. I'll touch briefly on some public policy challenges, because you'll see in a minute as I go through. Public policy challenges are real, and they add costs to our and affect our ability, or the ability of my members, our industry, to bring more housing units online. So a few of the market challenges ahead. Most of these you're probably going to say, of course, I understand that these are. But we have layoff. We've had layoffs. My wife was one of them, unfortunately. So we've got some economic uncertainty as far as layoffs and the ability to pay, or having the household income that is actually out there in the market to go out there and buy more housing, or trade up, as Elizabeth just talked about. When you get to your late 40s, apparently that's when I'm behind. So I'm supposed to have a house in the mountains, apparently. But well, we'll just hope that maybe that comes someday. Fragile consumer confidence right now. A lot of that's being driven by the highlighted bullet point, and we'll get into that a little bit more, because that's really, I think, kind of the name of the game right now is interest rates. Mortgage forbearance, not really. I put a question mark there because we haven't really seen a spike in foreclosures. Thankfully, we haven't. I don't think we'll see a return to 2007, 2008, 9, because banks are a little smarter about who they lend money to these days than they were doing at the start of the Great Recession. Managing customer expectations is a little weedy, but that's something that is a challenge for builders, right? Managing expectations. A little anecdote, right? I'll get into builder profit a little bit later, but in 2021, 22, really late 2021, right? We were pre-selling houses, right? I mean, our sales teams weren't sales teams, they were order takers, because demand was so high. But you would pre-sell homes, right? That's what it is. And so you weren't speccing homes, you were taking orders and saying, okay, I'll deliver your home by X date, hopefully, right? Well, they were pre-selling so many homes, and then we saw the pandemic hit and the supply chain go crazy, and building materials, which I'll get into in a little bit, spike so great. Builder profit was maybe 1%. Sometimes they're losing houses or losing money on homes. So that affects behavior about how much we're supposed to produce, and does that recalibrate what the market is seeing or what our supply is. Interest rates. I'm going to cover this probably 2 or 3 times just briefly, but I'll have a slide for you that just kind of, that I think illustrates pretty well what the buyers are facing right now, what the golden handcuffs are, kind of what Elizabeth talked about. We're not seeing much mobility. We're seeing a lot of stagnation in home ownership, and folks not willing to move even when they're aging. Traditionally, where they were starting to age out of that bigger home on that bigger lot, and they want something smaller. But we're seeing them remain where they are. But we're seeing that across all demographics, I think, as I'm sure you learned this morning and Elizabeth covered. But increased entitlement times. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about, public policy challenges, the ability for us, and it also speaks to what Elizabeth was just talking about, is the cycles. How do we kind of better plan for the cycles, right? Is there a boom and bust? We've been on a pretty big bull market since we came out of the Great Recession. And some will argue that we're completely out of it now. Some will tell you that we're certainly not where we were in 17 or coming right out of the pandemic, but we're certainly not back where we were in 2007, 8, 9, or even in 10. So price appreciation obviously has put homes out of reach for many Coloradans, many Americans. As Elizabeth said, this isn't just a Colorado phenomenon or Colorado problem. It is a national problem, heightened in certain areas more than others. Have we borrowed against future demand, right? Did we sell so many homes, either know there weren't enough to house all Coloradans between 17 and 22, where we've taken all that demand because low interest rates were so low. Tight lot supplies, the land that we have necessary to build more homes, it takes a lot longer to entitle, right? It can take 2, 4, 5 years now to entitle a piece of dirt, get it ready for vertical construction to build more homes. That plays with the cycle, and it also makes folks, a little queasy about, and if it's going to take me 5 years to develop this parcel and turn it into homes, where am I going to be in that market? Am I going to be more boom, or am I going to be more bust? Market competition increases. That's really among the builders. That's a good thing, because that usually means lower prices, and then managing cost increases in trades. So our trade partners, trying to manage them, and that we'll get into labor supply here in a minute. We have a few things going for us, at least, and I'm speaking kind of parochially as builders, but also largely as housing suppliers. There's record low in resale inventory, so that's keeping folks building because there is a market for new homes, new construction, right? We also have low new home inventory, so there's still that demand there. There is, again, a lot of pent up, or not pent up, sorry, sideline demand right now, because there's folks that really want to own a home, but interest rates, and I'll show that slide here in a minute, have skyrocketed and their ability to pay has decreased. In migration, obviously we're at a demographers conference or summit in migration, right? We were really benefiting from a lot of in-migration. Now, are we starting to see some of that migration from the coast? Is it flying over Colorado down to the Sun Belt, down to Texas, somewhere, points to the southwest of us? That will have obviously a little bit of a impact on what our ability to supply the market is, or the desire or the capacity to continue to supply our market. And then interest for build for rent, I won't get into that much, but that is keeping some of my builders busier where they didn't think they would be as busy. So that's the new phenomenon where we're building or paired product and single family detached product as rental products, not the traditional apartment complex. But the 4 Ls, land, labor, lumber, and loans, are all capital, really, are the 4 cost drivers of residential construction. This is what these drivers kind of create the behaviors that from our builders. They inform our builders of what they should be supplying, what product types, where they should be supplying those product types, and how much the market can bear, as well as how quickly and what the cost is to bring that product to market. And then the regulations, just really quickly, all have gone up in the past, decade plus, but our land use zoning, the entitlement times that it takes us, the government exactions, right? The price of water, the precious resource in the state and all throughout the Mountain West, that cost has come up. Tap fees is how we pay for our water. And then the permits, how much does a permit cost? But more importantly, how long does it take to permit a new home and have it inspected? So I'd use a lot of, obviously, National Association of Home Builder data when I talk about this, and a little more close to home or a little more localized is Zonda data that I'll get into. But on average, it's 61% of the final sales price goes to construction costs. So that's up 5% roughly on average from 2017. 18% is the finished lot costs. And then again, about 10% the builder profit. That's on an average scale, kind of over a long time horizon. Again, I shared that anecdote where it's not always 10, sometimes it's 1, sometimes you don't get any. But I wanted to break this down a little bit, and I want to really talk more about average lot size and average finished square feet, because we're seeing both of those decrease, especially in Colorado. These are average numbers nationally, on average finished square foot and the average lot size. But what we're seeing, and really quickly, is single family detached home sizes in 2022 were about 2,561 square feet, which was the smallest footprint since about 2011. The average peaked in 2015 and has gone down considerably since then. And on lot sizes, about 40,000, roughly 40,000 square feet is an acre, right? We're at about 17,000 square feet right now. It peaked at about 21,879 square feet per lot in 2008. And what we're trying to do here, usually what the market is indicating, and the market's directing us, or what builders are trying to do when they decrease the lot sizes and they decrease home sizes, is we're trying to meet the market where it is. We're trying to bring more entry level product back into the market. Now that's different in Oklahoma and Texas from a price point standpoint and the cost standpoint than it is in Colorado and other points in the Mountain West. But this just kind of breaks down and shows you kind of what makes up the cost of a home. And there's a really cool graphic if you ever go on NHB. It's an actual home. You can click and say that's the siding, and that's how much it took to frame, and that's how much it took to pour the concrete. And it's really instructive. So this is a little bit dated, and I'm going to show you kind of year-over-year comparisons. But this is construction, or a special survey that we do with Wells Fargo about every year. I think it's every year. And this is the top most significant concerns that builders face. And I'm going to go from 20 to 21 and show you kind of which which concerns replaced. And you can guess which concern replaced, the others most in the last year or two, right? But at the top for way too long right now has been building material prices. And that's really more since the pandemic hit, but also the availability of sourcing those materials and the time it takes to do so, which then adds to the construction cycle. The cost and availability of labor. Elizabeth touched on this a little bit when she, jabbed me a little bit there. We lost, 70,000. Is that what you said, right? 70,000 folks out of our industry when that Great Recession happened. And a lot of them reskilled, went into oil and gas, or a lot of them went home because we had a lot of, non-native labor here. A lot of them went home when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston. A lot of them went home when other natural disasters took place otherwise. They took their skills and they went to go rebuild kind of where they knew. Or they went and they reskilled and went into a different industry. And so our average age now for our skilled trades is into the 50s. And that's not very good. So we're doing our best as an industry to reskill or get young folks interested in these skilled trades. But we also need a sane immigration policy because there's a lot of non-native labor that knows how to produce, how to use their hands and are skilled laborers as well. Now, if you fast forward to the following 2 years, right, you see building materials still there. Look at interest rates, kind of the fourth one down. That went from a 2% concern to 66%. Right now in the Mountain West, it's above 80%. And it's 93% nationally, the concern on interest rates. And that has a chilling effect on the production of new homes. So right at the time, right, well, it's been that time for a while, where we really need to supply our market even more and more, we're in this kind of chilling effect spot in time because interest rates are so big. And I'll get to that here again in a second. But the second cost driver is land. And I talked about it earlier. We have fewer and fewer vacant developed lots ready to build. And I'll show you a slide here in a minute. But what really the cost of capital too, to develop land has dried up. It's coming back, but it dried up certainly after the Great Recession. So you used to have kind of in traditional sense, and it wasn't always this way, but you got a home builder and a land developer, right? The land developer develops the land and sells lots to a builder. Well, there are so few land developers coming out of the Great Recession. Some builders were forced to become their own developers, but it just lengthened the time to get new lots to market. So when land is constrained, obviously the cost of developable lots increases. So this is a look at the Front Range market, the Lebanon County Front Range market. So from the Wyoming border, basically down to the south of Pueblo. And you can kind of see the months of supply is in the, I guess, teal in the left graph is that teal line, but it shows you, and then on the right graph, it's the red line. But I think the point is the header, right? Market, we got our inventories up, but it's still 44% below where we were in 2008. So we just don't, and as I talked about earlier, it takes time to develop lots or create developable lots to build more housing. So this just kind of stands in our way a little bit to react more quickly to the market. It tells us, if you read the last Up for Growth study that was covered in the Denver Post, we're about 101,000 units shy. I would venture we're still above that, but we have a demographer in the room. She might be able to tell you better. Lumber materials. I'm just going to cover this a little bit. Obviously, you probably remember the spike in lumber, all the news articles around that. Lumber is the primary material input for a home, but there are plenty of other inputs into the home, and those have all risen quite a bit. Not as sharply. We're seeing the inflation rate of those building materials come down. It's one of the, I guess, silver linings in kind of the time that we find ourselves in, because the pace has slowed a little bit as far as housing production. We're seeing, supply chains are catching up, and supply costs are decreasing a little bit. But if you look at this kind of time series, if you will, from January 2020, so right before the pandemic to spring of this year, we're still up over 12%. So that still means we've got to bring homes, unfortunately, more expensive to the marketplace because they cost more to build. Labor, I covered it a little bit. I won't cover it too much more, but 21% or so the cost of constructing a single family home. I think that the sobering statistic is the Denver Post report, right? That we're going to potentially be 96,000, we're missing 96,000 jobs. We'll be 96,000 vacant construction jobs by 2025. So almost just a year away. 38%, increase from, actually, this is about a 2-year-old article. So, but it still today just speaks to the deficit of labor supply that we have in the market. 80% of Mountain West builders believe that the availability of labor will continue to be a significant problem in 2023. I think we know what the scarcity of labor does, obviously, to the price of labor. Loans, capital, right? Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm not going to talk just about capital, the borrowing capital or borrowing rates, the mortgage rates for borrowers, for home buyers, but the cost of capital to build and again to develop just land. A lot of times institutional lenders will not touch land development costs. So you have to go to private equity or hard money lenders, as they're sometimes called. And when you tell capital, hey, it's going to take me 5, maybe 7 years to give you a return on your capital, they're going to say, well, then I'm going to want a lot higher interest rate while I'm waiting for that return on my capital. So that just makes the time cost of money becomes a much bigger factor and contributes to, kind of the increase in the cost of housing that we see here. So this is the mortgage rate slide I referred to earlier. And we're now at 7.79%. So this was taken last spring when we were at 6.43% interest rates. And just look at the ability to pay and how much that decreases on a $600,000 home, which at that time was about the median cost of a home, especially on the Front Range. So your monthly payment goes from $3,381 up by $1,047. We have a statistic. NHB does an annual survey that's the priced out estimates, and for every $1,000 increase in the price of a home, you price out just over 2,000 Coloradans. That number is 150 some thousand nationally. So every little increment in cost increase affects the ability of folks to own or buy a home. Cost drivers and regulations, I'm going to spend less time on again, but these land use and zoning is kind of one of our bigger issues and the time it takes to entitle. It takes us 4 or 5 years again to entitle a piece of dirt and get it ready for housing production. It makes everything that much more expensive, and it makes it a lot more uncertain about whether you've timed the market right. If you're, again, what Elizabeth talked about, are you at the boom or the bust of the cycle? But this is, I just want you to understand and really the point at the bottom of the screen, the last point, but almost a quarter of a price of a home can be attributed to regulations. That's from federal government all the way down to local, but we're a local control state. So I would tell you the biggest share of that 24.3% is at the local level. But so 14.6 of the final price of a home is due to, higher price of a finished lot. And the other 2/5 or 9.7% is incurred by the builder after purchasing the finished lot. But the cost of regulation and the price of a new home is rising more than twice as fast as the Americans' ability to pay for it. So we have to look at that. I know that, when I'm talking to policymakers, those are the types of things we try to help remind them is they're kind of that 5th L, right, that I talked about at the beginning, that the law and policy, the local government in this state. I'm going to end with a couple of slides. One is kind of an indication of where this is just the 11 county Front Range, right, where the preponderance of all new construction is happening in the state. We finished, unfortunately, again this year, and it's become an unfortunate trend with more closings than we did starts. That does not help us get out of the supply problem that we find ourselves in. And then, because I was again supposed to end on a happy note or a more happy note, you can see that and Elizabeth kind of stole my thunder, but that's okay. She told you already that home prices have started to reduce. Obviously, much more heightened in Denver, where you saw a lot more of the price pressure, the increase in cost, the cost of a home anyway. But even in northern Colorado and Colorado Springs, we're starting to see the prices come down. So that's what I have for you right now. I know Phyllis and Jennifer are going to do a great job breaking this down even further, and I think we'll hear some questions later. So thank you for letting me be part of your Friday afternoon. This is my first time getting to be part of a demographer. So I think I can check the box. So now I'm cool. Right. There you go. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Jennifer and Phyllis, you would start sharing. You're ready to rock. Thank you.
Okay, so while I'm gonna have Jen share her screen, I'm gonna start off talking and then I'm gonna turn it over to Jen. So as Elizabeth, I think, shared with you, Jen and I staff an entity called the Colorado Future Center. And we, for many years, have been looking at this issue of housing affordability. We started with I'm not seeing the slides, Jen.
Hold on, I think I need to be on my other screen. Hold on.
But while she's setting up, we started with some work about 5 or 6 years ago. And what we're going to share with you today is work that came out of an update that we did to work looking at factors affecting affordability in Colorado. And so probably in keeping with batting cleanup after a long day, we're taking you into the story in the middle of our story. And so we're sharing with you findings from a report whose, I still don't see it. Do you?
All right, you see the
Okay.
first slide? Sorry.
Now I see it. Okay. We're sharing with you findings from a report that's referenced at the bottom of this slide. And this report, I mean, it's available for you to go to. I think of it as kind of cut in thirds. The first third of it was sort of an update on that relationship between housing units and households that Elizabeth so well took you through, that we're not going to repeat that. And so we came to the same conclusion as she, that compared to where we were 5 years ago, the economics behind the market look slightly more healthy. Prices have started to adjust a little bit, but yet there's a lot of unanswered questions about what might affect housing markets going forward in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm going to kind of jump in there. And then the third part of our research was really what we feel is a call to action for folks in Colorado to recognize that the people who are most challenged in affording their homes are the 50%, almost 50% of Coloradans who have household incomes of $75,000 or less. So I'm going to take you through some of the sort of outstanding questions that could affect doing housing studies going forward. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about the relationship between household income and housing. And I would just put a little kind of like pin in that we're starting to hear a lot about needing to do housing studies. And I think that what we would like to set up contextually, since we're kind of here talking data, we're here for the demographer, what I'm going to share with you kind of explains some of the contextualization around affordability, but also I think could be modified to look very locally, because no two communities are the same. And so if you go to the next slide, we're going to start to jump into places where there are explanations for what affected costs or affordability in the last few years that could be different depending upon where you're sitting in the state. So this one probably I should not have put at the lead, but since it's here, I'll start with it. The first thing we saw, we were doing this updated study right on the heels of kind of the markets reopening after COVID, or the economy reopening after COVID. And we saw this real break in the relationship between active listings and new listings. And if you actually look at this graph, it doesn't even really make sense. So, and I left it because it really shows you sort of like how broken things really got. If you go all the way to the end of this graph, you can see that it's suggesting that actually new listings for sale were greater than active listings for sale. If you think about that, that can't really possibly be true, because if it's listed, it has to be new and active. But what it really suggests, if you look at where this relationship broke, it's right kind of in the heat of the COVID pandemic, that during COVID, basically a unit for sale was almost like a unicorn. We've all heard those stories about, a house would come on the market and you would have 50 offers at above listing price almost immediately. So a lot of the distortions that we saw and a lot of the drive up in prices was in relationship to this notion that there was so few inventory coming to the market. And as I was with friends of mine over the weekend who said, who knew Boise, Idaho could become the place where everyone want to live? Well, you could probably say the same about places in Colorado. So as these units came on the market, they were essentially selling almost before they even became active. That relationship is now healing. And in most places, I don't think we have quite the frenzy we had a couple of years ago, but it's sort of something to watch, because in certain places where inventory is still limited, you could still be seeing this kind of relationship between what's available and how quickly it's being grabbed up. I think the next set of slides we have are ones that Elizabeth covered really well, but our next set of questions were around aging and the question of what choices Coloradans will make as they age. This just shows you the fact that we are in fact aging. The next slide shows you that we've done a good job of convincing people they should age in place. And I'd like to think that that would be an option for me. It seems like a nicer way to age than having to be in a more institutional setting. But as more and more people age in place, that whole notion of houses that are churning gets affected, because typically what you would assume is that people would get to the point where they age out of the unit that they're living in. Either they would go to some higher care setting, or they might perhaps move out of a larger unit into a smaller unit. Instead, we've done a good job of supporting people to stay in the houses they're in. And so we have reduced some of the availability for some of those units to churn. Some work that Jen and I are doing in Jefferson County suggests that it's when people get north of 80 years old that you start to see those units turn over. And so if you are in one of those communities in Colorado that's sort of at the head of the aging curve, you might see more inventory come in the next 5 to 10 years than a community that has a younger age demographic. So while so many of these statistics we're seeing are for the state, when you're doing a local housing study, you really want to better understand the circumstances around the population in your local area. Just real quickly, we have a tax policy that may change depending upon the outcome of next week's election that likely further incentivizes staying in a home. So we have a senior homestead exemption, as probably most of you know, that's not portable. So if you were to leave, you'd have to start the 10-year clock running again. It's possible that that is providing some small incentive for people to stay in place as well. Next slide, I think we jump to the sort of middle to younger end of the age spectrum. At the same time, we have this older generation that to a larger extent is probably staying in place. We have millennials that are a very large generation that are aging into home ownership. And you can see that the largest concentration of millennials, at least at the time we pulled this data, were 29 years old. Go back up one, Jen. And they are, as Elizabeth already shared, not yet fully transitioned to being owners. You can see here that the generations older than they are far higher propensity to be owners and lower propensity to be renters. And those millennials are kind of sitting at 50-50 right now. If you go to the next slide, you can kind of see that in another way, that shift between owners and renters. And again, those 29-year-olds are the largest single year cohort, and they are still the majority renters, not owners yet. So they could put pressure from the demand side. I think we have something, we didn't put in what about affordability. Switching gears a little bit, we've done quite a bit of work at the Future Center on this phenomenon of doubling up, which is increasing as time goes by. And so when we do it, we sort of classify a household as the primary household and a potential spin-off household. And we see that we have quite a few of these spin-off households that are living within housing units, doubled up with a primary household. And what we know about them is they are kind of overwhelmingly lower income. And so while they potentially could create a hidden demand for housing, for many of them, they don't have the capacity to buy into the housing market at where it is today, which is going to kind of lead into our call to action to recognize that we have folks in this state who are really stressing because they're living sort of at the lower end or right on the edge of economic stability and are probably the ones most struggling to be stably housed. Next, I think we have what we're calling alternative participants in the housing market. We're hearing a lot about the issue of investors, and Ted mentioned this new phenomena of sort of built for rent kind of properties. We did some work in the Metro, and what we found is that as of the end of 2021, as you see here, there were approximately 18,500 single family properties owned in an investor type entity. So we could, identify ownership entities that are LLCs or so forth. And while certainly, that's one component of what's contributing to this mosaic of affordability, you see that we find that it only accounts for about a little over 2% of the entire single family inventory. And I would also argue that to some extent, a single family investor owned home for rent does fill a market niche too for folks who maybe are here temporarily and would like to have a single family home, but don't either have the capacity or feel like it's worth it to buy. If you think of someone whose job got transferred for a year or two and they know they're not going to be here forever. So while they're certainly part of the conversation about affordability, they also are serving perhaps a segment of supply that otherwise we might not have. I think we have some more statistics. Oh, this sort of shows you where in the Metro, where the concentration of those investor holdings are. They tend to be more in the on the eastern flank of the Metro and the southern end than on the north and the west. And we find that about 41% of the 2.2% could reasonably qualify as a starter home. And what we did there is we said if the regional median income is around $90,000, what they could afford under, assumptions about interest rates and not exceeding 30% of their income is a home whose value is about $367,000. And of the inventory that is being held in those investor type structures, about 4 in 10 of them are ones that potentially could be serving. But again, that's 2.2 of only all the units and then 41% of that. So while it's an issue, it's sort of not the holy grail in addressing, we don't think, the issues around affordability. You've heard a lot about interest rates. They've actually, I think, even gone a little higher than when we pulled this graphic. And so certainly that is providing stress to potential homeowners, that the carrying cost monthly is significantly higher because of the interest rates. Yet when we did this analysis, which was about a year ago, next slide, Jen, we found that the majority of housing, again, by value, because we're working off assessors' values, would be affordable even with the higher interest rates, which at the time I think we were modeling about 6.75%. If you had two earners who were earning at approximately the median, so the median in the state was about in the 80s. If you had two earners at the median, you get to a point where almost all the housing is affordable. And we have a series of 3 more slides with 6 graphics. I'll take you through the first one on the left statewide, and then I'll have Jen move through quickly. So you see here on the vertical axis, we're graphing the share of housing that would be affordable, again, under certain assumptions. So this is by assessor's value. It's under the assumption that you wouldn't be spending more than 30%, that you were financing with a conventional loan at about 6.75%, and that we sort of did some estimates around the average property tax burden at either statewide or for the markets that we're looking at. And you see at the median income, in most of these graphs, you're running between 30 and 40% of the what we call owner occupiable housing. So these are units that, you know, aren't rental type units, would be attainable at the median if you only had one income. But if you double that income, you start getting up toward 80 to 90%. So when we talk about affordability, and to Elizabeth's point about the increasing number of smaller households, which is largely being driven by to some extent, the increase in single person households, the people who are essentially most stressed in trying to navigate this housing market are those who don't have that second income supporting the home. So on the left, you see what that profile looks like statewide. On the right of this slide, you see Metro Denver. And then if we go through quickly, we have a couple of other markets. We have Larimer County, El Paso County, again, same interpretation, and then Mesa and Pueblo. In Pueblo, once you get to, and almost in Mesa as well, once you get to having two incomes, you get fairly close to most of the homes being kind of in that attainable space. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jen to talk about then our kind of call to action around folks who are living more at the economic margin.
Hi, well, good afternoon. Yeah, we're just calling this set of slides I'm going to walk you through, calling it matching housing to household income. And like Phil said, we had looked at, you know, what are the conditions, the sort of economic and housing realities for households earning less than the median in the state. And the reason we chose 75 is because the way the data are structured out of census, that's the cutoff. So to where we can start to really slice and dice and understand where the cost burden situation lies for those households. And so while this is 75 is not the actual median in the state, it's fairly close to it. In 2021 was just over 80,000. So when you break it at 75, about 47%, so close to half of the households earn less than 75,000 in the state. And when we look at the share of the households who are cost burden, and when we mean that cost burden status, we're employing the household is spending more than 30% of their income towards their housing expense. And looking at all of the housing cost burden households in the state, 86% of them earn less than $75,000. So they are disproportionately burdened in terms of the share of those who are cost burdened in the state. And that has been something that's been increasing over time. And, you know, as the state population has increased, but you can see that burden, that share of the burden continues to rise in these income segments that households are earning that are less than $75,000. So in the state, it's about 650,000 households as of 2021 who are housing cost stressed and are living that stark reality. It's not to say that there are not burdened households earning more than 75, but again, that is your 86% of all the cost burdened households. And so Phyllis and I also like to use this context around this notion of foregone spending. It's a model that we built a number of years ago to look at, you know, what are the realities of both that experience of the housing cost burden households, but what does it mean for the broader community, both local and for the state? That what does it mean when they're spending more of that money, more of their household income on housing? It means that they have less money to spend on other things, that more likely they would spend in the local economy buying foods, buying children's shoes, or health healthcare needs, you name it. And modeling that for those households. And this is just for the housing cost burden households earning less than $75,000. It's about $5.6 billion in 2021 of excess spending in housing costs for those households. And when we look at the housing cost burden situation, at least in the housing world, y'all are probably more, very familiar with the housing speak around affordability when we think about subsidized housing, what we kind of refer to as capital A, is that they talk in these area median income bands, and looking at the households who are cost burdened. Yeah, they're earning 75,000 at that kind of gross income level, but it means something different depending on the size of that household. And so we took into account, based on household size, where those households would actually fall on those area median income bands for the state. And you can see here that disproportionately those households are earning less than 80,000 or earning less than 80% of AMI. Basically around just under 9 in 10 of those households. And when you get into that sub 80%, and really at the 60% level, that's where the low income housing tax credit, the LIHTC properties come into play. And, when you look at that big band, it's around 34% in the sub 30% AMI. Those are households that really need public housing supports. So on that, we're trying to, I think what Ted was also mentioning, we're trying to, while these can be particularly saddening kind of figures, that as we're thinking about how do we craft solutions in a local way, that there's tons of data that are available to support those locally focused needs, housing analytic needs, and those efforts can certainly craft opportunities that can provide solutions at that local level that are not necessarily apparent when we run statewide numbers. So with that, I'll turn it back to Elizabeth. Are you going to take the helm, I guess?
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, I can't clap very well with a pen in my hand. All right, so you guys got a pretty broad picture of some different implications, different things happening. So now we've got some Q&A for the rest of the time for everyone. And I'll let you know that there are a gazillion questions that did not get answered from this morning, let alone what I think is even potential for this afternoon. We will share a lot of those out to the panelists to get their take on some of them, and also put that within the information from the rest of the meeting. And for those of you, there's been a lot of you taking pictures of slides and stuff. Know that all of the slides are posted to the website underneath the meeting information. So you'll have that slide deck there, and then within like a month-ish, we'll have video of everything available as well, in case it was so engaging you're like, I have to watch that again. So I'm going to hit Ted first with a couple of questions, and I don't know if you'll know this answer. I'm sorry, I should have given that to you so it was closer. Within the construction that you've seen recently, what is the distribution of the types of housing being built in Colorado right now? Single family versus maybe multifamily, also single family, smaller condos, if you want to go there.
I don't think you want me to go there. Not enough of them are being built. I mean, you had it in your analysis, right? It's about a 50-50 split, right? But we're not building enough of any type. So, right, housing is a continuum. It takes subsidized, it takes the LIHTC properties that are housing options that Jennifer just mentioned. It takes your market rate, single family detached, your paired, your townhomes, and your condos or apartments. And we're just not seeing enough of any of those. So I can tell you, especially pre-pandemic, it was good to see. We saw if you swap or pair condos with townhomes and other paired product, that was becoming about 36% of all new housing starts. But we need condos alone to be somewhere, the healthy markets that we had prior to the Great Recession, they were about 20-25%. So when you look at the continuum and you look at kind of the bottlenecking that's happening on the continuum, whether it's the aging in place that we talked about, or just the lack of churn that Phyllis talked about, without being able to bring as much as we need of every housing type to the marketplace, it creates these hiccups in the continuum, and I think, kind of breaks the continuum. So it just has a ripple effect that we don't want to see and that we're trying to overcome right now. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. Kind of a side question on that one. So we're kind of in that 40,000-ish realm right now that we're building units. Can we stay that high with interest rates this high?
Great question. I think there's more than those factors, but I think you'll see more of the rent product and fewer of the home ownership product if rates continue to stay where they are. And I think the Fed, they didn't raise rates again, but they left it open that they might do one more rate hike before they're finished with it. So we could see, we were hoping by second quarter next year, we would see rates reduce. I think, your 2% and your 3% are probably gone for, it's going to take something we don't all want to see happen in the economy for that to ever happen again. But I think we'll probably see more rental than we do. Whether we maintain the pace, I don't have that crystal ball right now. It doesn't help. I'll just put it that way.
Right. So just when we're needing more single family, we
Right.
don't have the macro indicators available to get that.
And that was the point I was trying to make in my presentation, right? Is right when you need it most right now, all the factors are kind of flying in the face of being able to produce more housing, especially at the advanced clip than what we're doing right now, which is ultimately what we need if we're going to take a bite out of our supply problem.
So I'm going to kind of join two questions here, and it'll hit for both Phyllis and Jen as well in this. So first question is, have you seen any good programs, policies out there to get into that affordable space? That I think you indicated in from your work that you're saying that that's what we need, is in that affordable space. Did that make sense? And that is for Jen.
You're asking for like a case study?
But just, did you see any good programs out there? Because I mean, that's what you're saying, is that's what we need. Are there any good cases out there? So that's the first part of the question. That might be the answer.
Well, it's fine. I think that, so we had done some work a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, the company we were highlighting is no longer operating in Pueblo, but there was a company called IndieDwell that was looking at, essentially, I think they started, right, Jen, using shipping containers, but then they were looking at alternative building approaches. And they were, I think they were their first location was in Idaho, right? And then their second location was down in Pueblo. We had done this little case study looking at, the opportunities to build housing that wouldn't cost as much to build because they were using alternative building methods. And then there was sort of a workforce development aspect to it as well. And we were kind of hopeful that kind of model would be something we'd see more of. And I suspect over time we will. One of the things we didn't use in our slides today was there's this fabulous, if you go to the report, long-term graphic and more recent update to it that we did, showing that in all the major industries, the industry that has experienced this sort of least improvements in productivity is home construction. The joke we say is you still see a bunch of people standing on a site banging on things. We don't build cars that way anymore. We don't build rocket ships. We don't build anything that way anymore. And so we got pretty interested a few years ago, and then we've kind of moved off it, about is there opportunity to sort of modernize the way we do things that would create an affordability option? And so we got pretty excited about this one company that we did this case study of, and apparently they are no longer operating in Pueblo. I think they are still operating nationally, so I think there's probably more of a story there. But I think there might be, as we move forward, some of that might provide opportunities. That's kind of what comes to mind to me first, as opposed to more like, we don't really follow like local kind of community and I would say like socially minded programs, or not one is jumping to my short-term memory. I don't know about you, Jen.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of then it becomes a policy question around addressing, I hesitate to use the word manufacture, but the modularization of housing, because manufactured housing has a very specific HUD connection, and I think sticks in lots of people's short-term memory around trailers and FEMA trailers and such. But that to say that modularized construction is something that is, in terms of an inspection process, it's just off site. It's still held to the same sort of IBC and energy code standards, but the process is different. And to our understanding, and speaking with Mo Miskell at DOH, it's also a process to essentially educate and get local building processes streamlined to be adapted at that kind of a flow of only inspecting certain aspects of the development. But we did see some examples outside of the IndieDwell case study that had been successfully deployed, a small number of units. These are very much so like prototype efforts that were done in Aurora with some modular builder, but they were shipped in from Nebraska for that supplier. But it's both like this innovation side around productivity on the actual construction process, but also making sure that our local policies and procedures to essentially permit and inspect and issue certificate of occupancies for those units are streamlined in a way that it's not unlike the process that Ted was talking about, that entitlement, the very front end can be a long and arduous and very costly process that is not doing anything for the bottom line to make housing more affordable.
Okay, so thank you. So I'm going to turn the second part of that question actually and let Ted answer it first. If we maybe stop focusing specifically on affordable housing, do you think the market can handle creating the affordable housing?
So I think that we don't have a free market in housing. I think that's probably pretty evident from our presentations today. There's just too many different factors involved. Can the market support? I mean, obviously we've got, pick your number. I forget. I think Jennifer and Phyllis came up with a number when they did a report a few years ago. We did an analysis and it was 135,500 units short. So now I decided to be up for a growth article or study that was 101,000 units short. So how do we, right? That's the only way you've got to build yourself out of that supply deficit to bring prices down. You got to get somewhere closer to market equilibrium. I think as in all things housing, it takes multiple approaches. So no, the free market or the market rate homes alone probably will not get us out of this, nor will LIHTC or only subsidized housing, right? We talked about it earlier, housing's a continuum. You have to get that churn back into the marketplace. You've got to be able to offer the market homes at different price points, at affordable entry level, at move up, move up, or middle income, and then move up, and you need the luxury. You need everything being built because we have such a supply deficit. So there's not only there's not just one, I guess, component to the solution. You need it everywhere. That's how I'm going to answer that.
Yep, no,
But can I
that's-
add a little bit more on offsite construction? As Jennifer talked about
That would
a
be
little
great.
bit. So we've got 2 members in this space now, and so not all of us, Phyllis, are still sitting around pounding things, but that is the preponderance of home construction. She is right if you want to oversimplify it. But offsite construction is a real, I think, promising piece of the market. I can't cite right now what percentage of the marketplace it is. And there are a lot of factors, as Jennifer just alluded to, especially on the front end, that local governments don't really know what to do with this. They're like, okay, it looks like it's stick built, but you're telling me it's manufactured. Sometimes there's still that stigma, I guess, as Jennifer kind of walked us through on, is it manufactured means it's a trailer, but it's not. It's a really neat product, and it's erected like a very sophisticated Lego block, like or a Lincoln log set, right? If you Google Fading West in Summit County workforce housing, you'll see a video of how they bring this offsite constructed multifamily housing and they assemble it on site. And it's really neat. It reduces the construction time, the construction cycle time so much, which can help us on the cost. But we also need that relief, and we need local governments to understand this can go right next to your traditional stick-built housing. And Oakwood Homes and their On2 offsite division is showing that right now in Green Valley Ranch, and they'll do it in Reunion if Commerce City gets out of their way, and in other parts. And we're hoping that Fading West will move out of the mountains, will stay in the mountains because they're doing really good work there, but also come to the Front Range and work with some of these like Indie Dwell and other new companies, at least new to this market in this space. So sorry, I just wanted to touch on that a little bit more because I think it's a really neat it is our kind of dinosaur industry, if you will, from a production standpoint, trying to modernize. And then you got the 3D printing that I won't go into yet, but that's becoming a little bit, it's growing a little bit every year.
No, I think that's perfect. And I think, thinking about innovative ideas and how the construction industry is innovating is important to see as we move forward, because that will be one of those pieces that help potentially try to keep costs down. There's a gazillion questions and we're really close on time, but I'm going to ask one question that I think is really important is, what about water? How does water fit into what the home builders are looking at?
Yeah,
and then same question, I'll ask Phyllis and Jen the same one, so you can think about what you might say.
It's absolutely vital. I sat on with a state senator and a housing provider, or a water provider and a water policy expert a few weeks ago at a Colorado Sun event. And that was the topic, right? What do we do? And it has become a growing cost because of its scarcity. I would say, this is Ted saying, we have enough water for our growth. It depends how we allocate that water, right? And I'm going to say this, but I'm going to preface by saying I love my grass-fed beef or other locally sourced products. That's how I try to shop, my wife and I, and that's kind of the ethic that we have. But in the Mountain West, and specifically in the Colorado River Valley, all the way to Mexico, we use 97% of that water on ag products, which is largely alfalfa and other feed for cattle, which is largely exported outside of the United States. So it's really just to think about, you think more and more, well, okay, we're running out of water. We've got to have water conservation measures, and we should, or we got to stop, allowing people to have swimming pools, or we've got to water our lawns less. Well, we in the built environment, including the commercial sector, utilize about 14% of the water that is in any given year. 86% or more is in other uses. We often, though, have to now to have adequate water supply, and every local government requires us to, if we're going to bring new homes to market. We often now, if we're not using a municipal water provider like Denver Water, we're using one of the smaller water providers, we have to bring our own water. And CBT or Big Thompson shares, right? Colorado Big Thompson shares, especially in northern Colorado, have gone up immensely over the last decade. So it can cost somewhere, you know, 50,000 or more a home just to get water provided to that home.
Yeah.
And it's more in some other areas. So yes, I think we have the water to do it. It is going to cost a lot more. We need to develop more of our own kind of water resources as well, so that we're not relying too much on groundwater as well. So renewable sources. And if look up Sterling Ranch, it's in Douglas County. What they're doing is really cool. They need more sign off from state policymakers, though, to be doing that on a bigger scale, which is rainwater harvesting and some other water conservation measures. So there is stuff out there if we've got the will to do it.
No, very good. Thank you. Phyllis, Jen, anything on the waterfront that you would want to bring into the picture?
Well, I mean, we don't really directly study it, so I don't know that we can add much to all the information that Ted was just able to share. I don't know if this is the last question or not, but I would pivot off of water a little bit in the same vein and say, I think one of the real wild cards, like if we think more long-term in this region relative to the country and the world, is how all these climate-related effects are going to change migration and demand. And, you know, at what point do we need to be thinking even bigger? I mean, we obviously have like the local water issue, but we also have parts of this country where we may be creating climate almost refugees, you know, coastal areas. Is there going to be more pressure on certain areas in the Intermountain West or other parts of the country because of that? Which are the things that Jen and I sit and scratch our head around when we don't feel like doing real work. But so while we haven't directly studied, you know, do we have enough water to support the forecast we have kind of noodled on this idea of, should we be doing some sort of like scenario looks, like what if there's these like big movements and where people decide to organize themselves? We don't have the answers to that yet, but I think there are questions that are sometimes interesting to think about and a little scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yes, that's actually how we're going to end. The session today is on noodling, and we have nothing else to do. But actually, I'm going to tie that into a question that we had this morning that we didn't get to, which was this question on migration, on national climate situations, climate refugees, maybe refugees as a whole, and how do we think about those in our own forecast? And I will let you know that actually right now, any kind of a climate scenario or refugee, like a large refugee scenario, is not in our forecast. As we heard this morning, it really is a supply demand, labor supply, labor demand forecast. But what's nice to know is when we do have it that way, then you can take our forecast and you can apply different scenarios on that. So what if X happens? How would that apply the forecast? And we're working with the governor's office and a couple of different teams that are taking what we would say is our, just like our straight line forecast, or not, it's not a straight line, but it's our normal forecast, and then are applying different scenarios onto that. So those are some different ways that we can use it. So what I would like everybody to do right now is thank our amazing panel for their work and for their contributions. I want to now then thank all of you for being here. All of you online are awesome. All of you here in the audience are awesome for being here. I want to encourage you to all fill out your evaluations. I know you're going to say, nah, why do I have to do that? Well, because we actually use that information when we move forward plan for next year. So just if you're going for CEs, I know you have to do it, but even if all of you non-CEs, please fill it out as well. And last, thank you to all of our sponsors. SIPA, thank you again for supporting our event. Thank you to Vectra Bank for supporting our event. And thank you to Northwest Colorado Council of Governments for being our fiscal agent and supporting all of the registration for the event. And I'm going to turn it over to Adam for last minute.
Thank you, everyone. I want to show you one last slide that we have here. You mentioned the evaluation. The evaluation is now live, and you can access it here. You can access it on our on the State of Monterey Office Summit page. Want to make it real clear. We really appreciate everybody's comments, but we're going to require people who need CE credits to complete this evaluation and give us your information for your certificate. Okay. We're going to mail credit certificates out on the 7th. So you guys got to get this done right away. These are all of our sponsors here and all of our vendors. I want to say thank you to them all. And I also want to say thank you to you all for coming here on such a beautiful day and hanging out with us. Thanks so much.